Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another tutorial for Magic the Gathering Arena for complete beginners. This is like the 18th time I've started this video because holy canoodle, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I keep like looking down and being like, oh my god, I'm 5 minutes into this video and I haven't actually started doing deck construction, which is what I want to focus on in this video, deck construction. Before I dive right into that, I do want to talk about the two major divisions of Magic the Gathering gameplay. And this applies whether we're talking about a digital version, like Arena, or even like a real-life paper version. And that split tends to be between constructed and limited. At least, I think I'm getting those names right. Those are the words I used to use to describe things. I think that's still the current terminology. Again, I played Magic a lot a long time ago. I have been playing a lot of Arena. The last 2 days I've done all of the, hold on, where's my rank? There we go. I've done all of the daily quests. So I'm now at Silver Tier 2 in Constructed over here. I've been playing like crazy, but there's still a lot of like what is new and current in Magic that I'm still catching up on. But oh man, it's been a hell of a ride. Okay, excellent. We're 1 minute in. And we still haven't started yet. Keep an eye on that clock. So the split between constructed and limited. When people think about Magic the Gathering, they normally by default think about constructed. You have your whole collection of cards, you go through it and construct a deck of 60 cards, or more, but you know, probably just 60. And then you play against someone else who has also constructed their own deck. The other way to play, though, is the limited format, which doesn't require you to pre-construct a deck. Or at least not construct a deck out of your collection. And there's two major divisions to this. There's sealed deck, and then there's draft decks. So, and this is available here in Arena. And do note, if you toggle this little button over here of Arena Play Modes, you'll see even more things in this list, including things that just haven't unlocked yet necessarily. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. But let me go and close this over here. Okay, sealed deck. Let's talk about this format. What I love about digital is that sealed is basically going to be available all the time. In real life, classically, sealed tournaments mostly happen around the release of a new expansion, at release or pre-release, because it was a good way to get people to sort of kickstart their collection, right? They didn't have a collection of cards to construct a deck with. So you'd show up at a tournament event, and your entrance fee would cover a certain number of booster packs. You would sit down at a table, you'd open all your packs. So in this case here, it's 6 packs of 14 cards. Do note that the standard pack in Magic the Gathering Magic the Gathering Arena is 8 cards, 1 rare, 2 uncommons, and 5 commons. Because of the wildcard system, that actually works out really nice as a balance. But here we're going to get 14 card packs, which is basically closer. It's like the paper version. And we kind of need that because you're not being able to dip into your entire collection of cards. You do have access to an unlimited number of basic lands, so swamps, plains, forests, etc. You have access to as many of those as you need. But otherwise, you're going to be opening these 6 14 card packs. And out of these cards, you're going to be building a 40-card deck and using that to play with. You do get to keep these cards afterwards, right? So your entrance fee to this sealed mode over here is buying you all these 6 times 14 cards. If you already have 4 copies of the card in your collection and you open this, normally when you open a pack and it's a copy of a card you already have, the system actually like replaces it with another equivalent card. So if it's like, if it would be your 5th copy of a rare, instead it'll give you a different rare. In sealed, when you open these packs over here, it can give you something you have a 5th copy of because you get access to it for this particular tournament. And then apparently what happens is afterwards, when you're done this event and you get to keep these cards and they get added to your collection, at that point the 5th one will then get replaced with something you don't already have 5 in. So which is good. It does the right thing basically. Again, I might be a little fuzzy about these details, but as far as I understand it from doing some reading, that's what it sounds like it is. So you would build your deck, you would go and play, you can keep playing until you have 3 losses, and depending on how many wins you get before you get 3 losses, you'll get different rewards. Now it looks to me like this keeps going past 7 wins. I can't scroll it or anything, but it looks like it keeps going, and it certainly implies keep going until you reach 3 match losses. It doesn't say 3 match losses or 7 wins. It looks like no matter how many wins you get, you will get 3 extra packs as a reward, but then also you will get some gems. And actually, if you can get to 6 wins, then you will get 2,000 gems, which is the same as your entrance fee over here. But remember, you don't even have to get to 6 wins, because you're getting to keep all these 6 times 14 cards, plus 3 extra packs over here. So this is basically just another way to buy packs. Like, you can buy packs from the pack store for gems, or you could just play sealed as well. And have a fun and interesting experience. I do want to do a video for this at some point. The other thing that you can do, where are we at? 5 minutes in and we haven't actually started deck building yet. There we go. Still gonna happen. 18 takes later, and they're still there. The other way to play is a draft tournament. In a draft tournament, you sit down with 3 boosters, or 3 packs over here. You sit down at a table with other people, and rather than just you open up all your boosters and then build a deck out of it, what happens is you open up a booster, choose 1 card from that booster to keep, and then pass the remaining cards to your left. Meanwhile, the person to your right is then passing you their pack, minus the 1 card that they have picked out. And you're going to repeat that, going 1 card at a time until you've run out of cards. So you're picking a card, passing to left, picking a card, passing to left, and so on and so forth. So you don't need as many packs to play in this format, because you are, theoretically, choosing from fewer cards, right? You're self-selecting. Okay, I'm only picking I don't know, I've got a couple of good black and red cards. I'm going to keep picking black and red cards and make a black and red deck, for example. So you can do that. One of the things I used to do when I used to play sealed deck, draft in real life, and I was not the only person, and actually in digital formats, is I would rares draft. Think about it. If you're sitting at a table with, like, say, I don't know, 8 people, right? So you're doing this, you're opening a pack. What I would do, I was opening a pack, I would just take the rare, pass to the left. Then I get the pack of cards from the right, and if there was rare, I would just grab that. In theory, if no one else happens to pick the rares, because they're not fitting into their deck, for each one of these packs you could open, if you're sitting at a table with 8 people, you could end up with 8 rares. Times 3, so 24 rares. I mean, that didn't really happen. And at that point, you would end up with a completely unplayable deck, because there's no way that would work. Because, you know, there'd be stuff from all kinds of colors, nothing would synergize. But at the end of the tournament, you'd get to walk away with a bunch of cool rares. Alternatively, you could just, you know, try to win, and that would also be a pretty good reward. But anyway, that is one of the interesting things with draft, is not everyone plays draft to win necessarily, which is kind of nifty. Now, I believe this ranked mode, if I understand correctly, and I haven't played it yet too much, I believe you're not actually necessarily drafting against a real person in this case, because you don't have to sit down for a real tournament. What's happening, I think you're drafting against sort of like a kind of a bot environment or something like that. I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but you do get to, like, take your time and pre-build this. You could start drafting, then walk away for dinner. It's not the same thing as a timed tournament kind of scenario over here. But likewise, you keep playing until you lose 3 matches, and depending on how many matches you win, you will get different amounts of rewards over here, which is kind of nice. So those are 2 limited formats as opposed to deck building. Okay, 8 minutes into our deck building tutorial, let's talk about deck building. So if you hit the deck build button over here, this is going to be your series of all the decks that you own. In Arena, it does start you off with a bunch of starter decks already unlocked, including all the Cards Knows decks unlocked, which is wonderful. You can select the deck from here. You can delete a deck. You can clone it if you want, right? Clone. So let's say, look, what you see I've done here, I had my initial deck, I cloned it, made some tweaks, then played it some more, cloned it, made some more tweaks. I like keeping these old versions of the decks around so I can see the progress, and also, like, you know, like, oh, it's not running as well. Why? Oh, I guess this last change may have not been a good idea. So I can sort of revert back over there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. There's also the import and export buttons. If you have a deck selected and you hit export, it will copy the deck to your clipboard. Just like, it'll say, you know, 4 whatever's, you know, 20 swamps, etc., etc. It's just plain text, so you can go and, I don't know, post it on Reddit and get some feedback about if you've done a cool deck or not, or whatever. And the import button also exists over here. Same thing. In the same format the export works. If you copy some text of a deck and then import it, then it will give you an imported deck in here. Very nice to go and sort of share things, find other things online, and whatnot. Okay, let's talk about the actual rules. So if we hit plus over here, we are going to start a new deck. There's 2 ways that you can see the screen. I really like the side view over here, where cards get listed there. So let's say I add a few cards to the deck. They're listed this way, and you can mouse over and see them. Some people prefer to work in this deck layout over here. both work perfectly fine. Just, you know, personal preference. I like the list this way. I find it a little easier to follow and see everything at once, personally. This list over here of cards in your collection, if you hit this little minus button, it'll actually zoom out a little so you can see more things at once, which might be better or might not, depending on how much text reading you've got to do. And yeah, you can see like alternate card styles and things like that as well. Okay. So that's the basics of the little interface over here. We're also going to look at this filtering system extensively. Before we actually start, and actually let me just pop out discard. I'm just going to hit plus again. Before we actually start, there's a pull-down menu here to select your format. There are many formats you can play, even in Constructed. And so, there's some really fun formats, like Singleton, where normally in Magic the Gathering, you can have up to 4 copies of any one card. With the exception of Basic Land, you can have, you know, 24 copies of Swamp or something like that in your deck if you want. That's perfectly fine. Basic Land is unlimited, but normally you can have up to 4 copies of a card in your deck. In Singleton, you can only have a single copy of each card in your deck, except for Basic Land. It's a really fun format because you can't really build strongly integrated combo decks, and there's a little bit more randomness, and it's a really fun format. I really like to play this one with my friends. Pauper's another kind of fun format over here. In Pauper format, you can only use common cards, no uncommons and rares. So what happens when you pick this format over here, all it does is it sort of filters this view. So now that I picked Pauper, it won't show me any rare cards or uncommon cards in this list whatsoever. So it just filters to cards that are legal. If you click on the deck over here, you can change the format again. Most of the time, you will be playing in standard format. Standard format is the current and modern sets of cards that you're going to be playing with. Basically, the current core set plus the current expansions. Standard is and has always been the most popular format in Magic the Gathering because it stays fresh, right? As new expansions come out, old expansions cycle out, and therefore you constantly get this refreshed pool of cards, which means that the meta, that is to say, sort of the popular decks of the day, will constantly change. Especially so. I don't know if this is exactly the case anymore. I know this has changed. I'm going to tell you some slightly old school things. But things tend to be arranged in blocks. I don't think the term blocks get used as much anymore. I think it might be cycle or something. But basically, groups of expansions will fall off together. So you get these like pretty like remarkable refresh periods of the game. And we're actually in one right now. The Throne of Eldraine, which I think I keep saying like Throne of Eladrin, which is a different Wizards of the Coast property. The Throne of Eldraine deck or expansion is now out. And that has cycled out some old cards. There's still the core deck 2020, and there is still 3 other expansions currently in the pool of cards available. But it has made dramatic changes. Decks that used to exist can't anymore because not all their cards are in there. Some decks that used to exist still exist, but their purpose has changed, or the way they play has changed, or their balance has changed because now there's new cards to compete with. Some of the decks still exist but have gotten better because it's like, oh, this new card that just printed all of a sudden fits great in this sort of deck idea I had before, and oh my god, the deck is so much stronger than it used to be. Anyway, that's standard. There's also various, whether we're talking about digital or paper versions of Magic, various historical modes that let you use, you know, potentially all cards ever printed. It's always interesting to watch that, but it doesn't tend to be as popular because, you know, a lot of old cards are a lot just harder to get a hold of, so, you know, it's harder for everyone to participate, but standard. I believe the difference in this filter for standard and traditional standard is, I don't know if there's an actual difference in what will happen to the interface. A traditional standard game, I believe, is played best 2 out of 3, with sideboarding in between. Whereas standard here in Magic the Gathering Arena is just the best of 1. You play 1 match against someone, and boom, win or lose happens at that point. And there's slightly different implications with sideboarding, as well as your opening 7-card draw, but maybe we'll get to that later. I don't want to overcomplicate things. Anyway, we're going to work with a standard format constructed deck over here, because that's usually what you're going to do. I don't think this filter here has any impact really on where you can play the deck most of the time. It mostly just filters the list. So if you're playing against someone else you're dueling your friend in a standard format, doesn't mean you can't use your Singleton deck or your Pauper deck, right? I mean, it just might not be as good. Okay, deck construction. 60 cards is the standard size for a constructed deck, as opposed to 40 in limited. Now, you can put more than 60 cards in a deck, but it's usually a bad thing because you want your deck to be as consistent and sort of tight as possible. If you build an oversized deck, the more cards you add above 60, the more often you won't draw the card that you need in any given situation. You want to keep your deck as small as possible. In fact, in constructed, if you could do like a 40 card deck, most people would, because the smaller and tighter a deck is, the more consistent it will be. So 60 cards, and that includes your land. Now, how much land are you going to want to put in your deck does vary. Now, the Magic the Gathering Arena deck builder here will automatically put lands in in your deck that it thinks is appropriate. So for example, if I put a Charmed Stray in here, which is a white card, it will automatically add 24 planes into here. I believe the auto land thing in here tends to just put in 24 land. If I go and throw in cards of different color, let's say we grab red over here and I put in Goblet Banneret and do that, there you go. Now it's going to have 12 plains and 12 mountains. If I go and continue to add, there we go, more red cards in here, you can see it's going to start leaning things more towards mountains than plains. Gets even more so if I throw in some green cards in here. There you go. So now it's 7 plains, 11 mountains, and 6 forests. It tries to pick what it thinks is a fairly appropriate mix of land. You can, at this point, manually make any changes. I can say, you know what? I don't need this many mountains. I'm going to get rid of a couple of mountains and add in a couple of forests. Now that I have manually interacted with the basic lands over here, it will no longer make auto suggestions. If I were to go and add a black card here, so Cauldron Familiar, I add it in, note it did not add a swamp over here because I've taken manual control. If I would like the game to, or the deck building system, to suggest land for me again, I can do that. The filter's up here. If you click the land filter right over there, so it only shows you land, you see there's a button for suggest land. If you hit this button, it's going to suggest land over here, and you're back in automated mode. So if I were to go now and add a blue card to my deck, it would add in some islands. So that is the land behavior over here. So of course you need land to cast your spells, and you need lands of the appropriate colors for the mana of your cards. Rule number 1 of deck building in Magic is, the more colors you have, the harder it might be to build a cohesive deck, because what if I'm holding a handful of red cards, spells, creatures, well, creatures are spells, but anyway, a handful of red cards, but I've got no mountains in my hand. Instead I've got, 2 plains and an island. Oh, that is pretty crummy and miserable. Designing multicolored decks can be trickier. Now, they can be very powerful because it gives you more sets of cards to draw from, in your construction, to create your various combinations and your various mechanics, which are kind of nifty. But it can be a little tough. Do note, however, that beyond the basic lands here, there are other lands that provide multiple colors of mana, dual lands and whatnot. If we go to the land filter over here, so by hitting this button, I'm only looking at lands. Okay, now, there's many different types of planes. I mean, they're all identical except for the art. Many islands and so on. Ooh, that's a big list of stuff. Can I, trim this down? Yeah. If you use this advanced filter button over here, I can say, only show me cards that are common, uncommon, or rare, and mythic rare. I'm going to leave off basic lands. So now, I'm seeing all land that isn't a basic land. And there's quite a lot of things. Some give you mana, some don't. Some lands, despite the fact that mana generation is the standard thing for land, some lands, they don't have to actually give you any mana. But then we can see cards that the Simic Guildgate taps for either green or blue. Oh, so if I add this in, I don't need as many islands and forests. And in fact, the auto land system has taken that into account. It actually removed an island and a forest when I added in the Simic Guildgate. So these are pretty cool. The ones that are also nifty, well, here, this taps for 2 things and also scries. So these stuff like Simic Guildgate over here, these standard dual lands, they're actually common. They're very easy to get over here. There are uncommon versions and specifically rares, like Breeding Pool also gives you blue or green, but it gives you an option to not come into play tapped. Normally this land here comes into play tapped. This one comes into play tapped, or you can pay 2 life. Then it doesn't come into play tapped. This tends to be a lot stronger. Yeah, no one wants to take life damage, but one of the things you have to remember to Magic is life is a resource. only the last point of life actually matters. The first 19 points of life that you've got don't matter and can be spent as a resource. Now, obviously, that's, you know, okay, well, it's nice to have a life buffer and blah, 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 blah. But it is a resource that you can tap into. So in this case of Breeding Pool, for example, so that it doesn't come into play tapped. I like that you have a choice, though. If I don't need this extra mana on this turn, I can still put it into the battlefield tapped. But if I need it right away, just to keep up tempo, I can pay the life to do that, which is really nice. So it's definitely worth taking a look at the different types of lands over here. Now, one of the things that's also important to talk about in this advanced filter button, let me go ahead and reset over here, is that by default, this filter only shows you cards that you have collected, only cards that you own at least one copy of. But you can also have it show cards you haven't collected. In fact, if I turn these both on, it'll show me every card that is legal in this format, which is basically going to be every card from the core set plus the 3 expansions, or sorry, 4 expansions. These 3 previous ones and the new Throne of Eldraine here. So if I come out of this, you can see some cards are grayed out. Arrested Zeal over here is a card I don't have a copy of yet. You're going to see a lot of that from the previous expansions because I wasn't really playing Arena until now. So I've got, I bought a bunch of boosters or packs from the core set as well as Throne of Eldraine. And by playing and completing various daily rewards and leveling up my my mastery over here, yeah, don't save this. Leveling up my mastery over here, I've gotten various packs for previous expansions, and I've used my wild cards to craft some of those. But generally speaking here in my construction, I'm not going to have a lot of stuff from previous expansions. That's fine. So they're here. Now, there's nothing stopping me from putting these... Oh, when you reset my filter. There you go. I can put these into a deck. I can plan to build a deck with Arrested Zeal. It will show up like gray here and red here because I don't actually own a copy of this card. If I right-click on this card here, or if I hit the little plus next to the green here. Now, normally hitting plus adds extra copies of the card. I said green, I meant red. Wow. If it's red and I hit plus, it'll actually open up the construction interface, allowing me to spend my wild cards to make copies of this card over here. You can also, there's a button down here for crafting all, which will let you craft anything you are missing for your deck out of all the wild cards you've got. So I like that because it still lets you try to construct a deck out of stuff you don't have. Also, this is good if you're importing decks from the internet, right? You can import a deck from the internet and you might not own all the cards, but you'll still be able to import it, look at it, and then craft whatever you might want to do to fill in the gaps. That'll also apply to cards I don't have all the copies of. So Castle Ardenvale here, I have 2 out of 4. You can never have more than 4 copies of the card. If the opening a pack would give you more than that, generally speaking, it gets replaced with something else. And there's this whole vault system, but that's, you know, you don't need to know that now. So if I go, I can add Castle Ardenvale. I can try to add it up to 4 times. It'll show me in this list, it'll sort of break it up into 2, because it'll show me the 2 that I own, and then the 2 that I don't own, and just let me know what's going on over there, which is really handy. I think that's pretty much all we need to talk about for the sort of Magic the Gathering interface side of things. You can name your deck. So, I don't know, White Deck of Doom. You name your deck. When you hit done, it'll tell you that it might be invalid. In this case, it's invalid for 2 reasons. One, there's less than or fewer than 60 cards in here. And also, it contains cards not in my collection. But I can still save it. I'm just not going to be allowed to play with it. And there it is, the White Deck of Doom. I believe this is ordered so that the decks you most recently edited are at the front of the list. Although decks that are invalid for some reason come after the decks that are valid. So it's in there. If I mouse over, oh, it doesn't tell you in this tooltip, but that's okay. And you can edit the deck by selecting it and hitting edit, or just more common probably, double clicking on it over here and getting into things. Okay, yeah. There might be some other interface things that I've forgotten. Oh, there's a button here for sideboard. Sideboard won't mean anything to you if you're playing in standard mode. Well, with maybe one exception. A sideboard in the traditional standard, like sort of tournament format, you might be playing something like, say, best 2 out of 3 with someone, okay? So you sit down, you've got your 60 card deck, you sit down against your opponent, and you play a game with them. Then, one of you wins, one of you loses. Then before you start your second game, you can go to your sideboard. Your sideboard can contain up to 15 cards, and you can swap cards between your sideboard and your deck, 1-to-1. So if you add a card from your sideboard into your deck, you have to take a card out of your deck and put it back into your sideboard. And that allows you to tweak your deck based on your opponent. So, you know, you might include cards that are specifically there to, you know, counter certain colors, right? Like, oh, my opponent's playing a green deck against me. Well, in my sideboard, I've got a card that says blow up all green creatures or something of that nature. Sometimes it's a little less specific than that. Some of the cards in here might be cards that are good at breaking up certain combos. They don't necessarily target a color. They might be there more to break up combos or are a good counter to some sort of deck that's popular in the meta. So the meta in Magic the Gathering refers to sort of popular decks, right? Like if you know that, aggressive red decks are really popular and common right now, you might want to include some cards in your sideboard that are good against that. They might be cards that, you know, say things like protection from red, or they might just be like big fat walls that like are good at just slowing down aggression, giving you more time to develop your combo or whatever it might be. In regular 1-versus-1 standard play, you don't use the sideboard. You don't generally have to worry or think about the sideboard. There is an exception, and that exception is hang on a sec. Reset, not collected. There you go. Here's an example of a card where it matters. Karn over here, his bottommost ability is you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game. Reveal that card and put it in your hand. This lets you go through, in theory, your entire collection of owned Magic cards to pick an artifact card that's not in your deck and just add it to your hand. In practice, and this is what happens in tournament play as well as in this digital version over here, the card that you choose, I believe, will come from your sideboard as opposed to your whole collection. Anyway, I shouldn't have even included this section. That's like way too advanced stuff that doesn't come up at all, but I figured I should make a note. Okay, let's talk about actual just deck construction in general and what kind of ideas might you want to use. So your 60 card deck, which is what you want to target, you're gonna, first of all, there's gonna be a certain amount of land in it. The default auto land tool in the deck builder, if you're just using basic lands, will target about 24, which is a good number. Too little land means you may not draw enough to be able to consistently cast your spells, well, including summoning creatures. Too much land, you might just, well, draw too much land and not have enough stuff to do things with. Back when I started to play, everyone says, oh, you put in about 20 land and then 40 other cards. That number has definitely gone up over the years, mostly because the play is a little bit longer, a little less bursty than it used to be. So you tend to use cards that might be a little bit more expensive, so having more land is good. You also need more land if you're playing a multicolored deck. Because if you're playing, like, say, 3 different colors or something like that, you kind of need to draw more land to compensate for the fact that you need more consistently in color. If you're playing a monocolor deck, single color, and if the deck doesn't have that many expensive cards, you can really trim this down quite a bit. Back in the day, the old, like, I'm trying to think, like, the super aggressive mono red stuff sometimes ran with like 18 mountains or something, which was ridiculous, but the cards all cost like 1, 2, and maybe 3. It was a whole thing way back then. There is a special note to be made in Magic the Gathering Arena when you're playing 1v1 mode. The way it generates your starting hand is it's not the same way as you would do it in real life. It's also not the same way it does it if you're playing best 2 out of 3. In Arena, when you're playing a best of 1 format, the game actually draws, internally, before it shows you anything, it draws 2 separate 7-card starting hands. And then it keeps the one, it shows the one to you that has land the closest to the average number of land in your deck. And that means it's very unlikely that you will get a starting hand with, like, no land or all land or something like that. And by knowing that, and you sort of tweaking the number of lands in your deck, you can influence the sort of sweet spots in Arena for how much land you play with. It turns out, other people have done the math and the simulations, it turns out 22 and 26 land is sort of the sweet spot for really maximizing that system. Whereas if you have, say, 25 land, you will still have more land overall in your deck, but your starting hand is going to have statistically the same amount of land as maybe if you started with 22. More or less, it's sort of a flat curve. This is a really minor little thing, but I know that if I didn't mention it, there'd be some people in the comments saying, well, actually. So if you want to min-max your starting opening hand, 22 or 26 land is actually the sweet spot because of math. But it's not that critical. Anyway, decks. Yes. So let's put in some cards here. How do we build a deck? Well, often what I do, if I'm, especially if I don't really know the card pool very much, new expansion came out, how do I sort of build a deck? Well, what I often like to do is I like to say something like, I'm going to just take a look at the rares and mythic rares, because rares aren't automatically more powerful than other types of cards. In fact, a lot of times there's going to be, like common and uncommon cards, but even common cards that are just, no, these are just standard. You have to put them in, every black deck has to have 4 copies of this one black common card because it's just like really, really important. The rares, some of them, sometimes they do tend to be more powerful, but a lot of times they're just more specialized. They also tend to have a lot of text on them. Here's a good one, Happily Ever After. Oh my God, this is really fun. So Happily Ever After is really weird. How do you normally win in Magic? Well, one, if you bring your opponent's life down to 0, then you win. The other way that's interesting in Magic is if a player has to draw a card but can't because their library is empty, they lose. They instantly lose. If they have to draw a card but can't draw a card because their library is empty, they lose the game. Which actually opens up the idea of these mill decks, named after a millstone, an old card that doesn't exist in our standard format anymore. But basically, you just like burn through their library. You cause like a bunch of cards from their library to go into their graveyard, and so that at the start of their turn, they try to draw a card but can't, so they lose. You can beat them without dealing a single point of damage to them. It's really cool. And then you got really weird cards like Happily Ever After here, which it's got a lot of text, blah, 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 but at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors, if you control all 5 colors, and you have 6 different types of cards, and your life total is greater than your starting life total, you win the game. This card lets you instantly win the game. Well, not instantly, because it's an enchantment, so you have to play it during your main phase, and it only triggers at the beginning of your upkeep, so your opponent has a whole turn to respond to it. But this is another weird way to win the game. Anyway, so you can see, like, rares do funky things. Like, Acclaimed Contender is actually pretty good value. A 3/3 for 3 is not bad value. But more importantly, is this Acclaimed Contender has a bunch of stuff that has to do with knights and auras and equipments and things like that. So what I like to do is often look at the rares I might own and then be like, okay, I'm going to build a deck around this. So that might be one way to do it. The other thing, if I actually just go and reset the filter over here, what I did is I opened this up and I was like, oh my God, it's a cat. What? A cat? That's so cool. There's cat-type cards? And I go into search and like, cat. And then it's like, okay, is there any combos available for this type of card, right? So there's a bunch of cat cards. There's things that reference cats-ish. I mean, Ajani over here creates cat soldier tokens. It turns out, as far as I can tell, unfortunately, there's no cat meta deck available. Oh, let me reset these. Because as far as I can tell, there's nothing that says, like, all your cats get +1/+1 or anything like that, which is a little unfortunate. It'd be really, really nice if it did. But as far as I can tell, it doesn't, which, breaks my heart. Come on, Wizards! Give me some cat stuff. But that'll happen too. Like if you look at particular type, like, well, knights is a big one, right? If I search for just knights, it turns out there's a lot of interaction with knights. So Worthy Knight, whenever you cast a knight spell, put a 1/1 human creature token. Oh, okay. So if I have Worthy Knight in play, and then I cast other knights, it's going to give me some token creatures. Tokens are cards that aren't in your deck. You just have like cards, on the table next to you, and when a spell says it makes a token, you put that token into play, and it represents a creature or something like that. Venerable Knight. When Venerable Knight dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on a target knight you control. So again, you can see, okay, there's clearly some knight synergy that is possible. So that's a good way to take a look at things. Search for these various keywords on cards, and then see if there's any sort of interaction between things. There certainly is a lot with knights or Knights. And even if something isn't like, so Inspiring Captain doesn't have any specific synergy with a knight card. It gets, +1/+1 to, any creature. It doesn't have to be a knight, but it is in and of itself a knight, which means it works into whatever grand strategy you might be working. One of the things with, like, if you go with knights, is a lot of knights are cheap, right? Venerable Knight costs 1, Worthy Knight is 2, Youthful Knight is 2, Claimed Contender, Contender is 3, and so on. So it's like, okay, knights are pretty cheap. So when we're talking about, or we're making some sort of low value, like weenie deck, lots of cheap cards that come out very quickly. If that's the case, you're going to want to follow this up with, are there any cards that exist that give maybe like +1/+1 to all my creatures or something like that? Because I'm going to have a deck that's probably going to have a lot of small creatures. So how do I work with that? If we search, I think we can search for +1/+1. All creatures. I mean, you can do something like this. And then you can look for things that might make sense. Oh, creatures you control get +1/+3 until the end of your turn, and untap them. Ooh, Rally to Battle. Is that something I might want to fit into my little weenie deck? So there's a few little things like that. I think there's a Golden Knight that gives +1/+1 to all your creatures. I go over here. Gold cards are cards that use multiple colors. Oh, there you go. So it's not all creatures. Inspiring Veteran, though, is a knight. He costs 2 for 2/2. Good value. With decent value, it's fine. So other knights you control get +1/+1. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, my knight deck, oh, it's not just going to be white. It's going to be white with at least a little red. It might be a splash of red. In terms of literally the only red I might have in the deck is Inspiring Veteran. But right away it tells you, okay, I'm going to need at least some mountains in here, right? If I'm making a knight deck, which, I don't know, we'll just, here, we'll just throw in a bunch of knights for now, and then we can always trim things down later on. There we go. The Paladin. There. Inspiring Captain. I don't know. We'll start with something like that. So we're at 52 of 60 cards. We've got some plains, some mountains. But yeah, now if we remove the knights, then it's like, okay, let's consider things that aren't creatures. So I'm going to go into this filter here. So, I don't know if, like, it'd be nice if you could, if there was a way to quickly say everything that's not a creature. Here, Wizards or whoever's responsible for actually designing the software, or maybe there is a way and I just don't know it. So if I want to see everything that's not a creature, I can just select that. So creatures won't show up in the list. Actually, I don't want land either. But there might be a button to, like, filter out the things. But so then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do that, and white and red and colorless. So then you start looking at things that aren't creatures but might fit into whatever you're trying to work with. Again, here we've only got the bare splash of red, literally just 4 cards, and they only use 1 red. So do we add more red to make it worthwhile, or do we trim down on the amount of red we've got in here? So for example, we might consider show me, we want lands. Yeah, let's just go down to just lands. And oh, I don't have this set right. Hold on, let me reset. Not collected. Just show me lands. And filter out the basic lands. There we go. We may want cards that tap for red and white. I may have already scrolled past it. I wouldn't put it past me. Oh, there we go. So the Temple of Triumph, the Sacred Foundry, and the Wind-Scarred Crag are all cards that tap for red or white. We may not even want to include any mountains. I mean, admittedly, these are rares, and, well, that's also a rare. But we may want to just do, say, those guys and remove all the mountains. So now we have 8 lands that can tap for a red, but they can also tap for a white, because apparently my deck's going to be primarily white. So you can keep going through these various iterations to try to design what you're going for. One of the things you might want to do is only show you cards, or, only include cards that you actually own. Like here, this is good for planning. I tend to do this. I will add all copies of a card, 4 copies. Now, I may not want 4 copies of a given card in the end. The optimal number might be 3 or 2 or even just 1 for some reason. But I like to, click to add 4. And then afterwards be like, okay, do I want to craft the ones that I'm missing? Or do I want to take them out? Like, maybe the Ardenvale Paladin over here, well, it's common, so it's actually going to be really cheap and easy to craft. But if this was a rare, I might be like, you know what? I don't know if I can justify crafting the 4th rare card. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just take that one out. You know, there's little things like that, so you can tweak and tune. One of the nice things over here, if you click here, you can get a breakdown of some of your deck and the stats. One of the important things to look at here is the mana curve of your deck. And you can see where your expenses are. Here we have a lot of 2-cost drops, 2-cost cards, more than anything else, which generally speaking it means fairly cheap. Some decks, depending on how you play, you're going to want, you might want a flat line, you might want a slope that drops downwards. Like, there's different types of mana curves that you're sort of going to aim depending on what kind of thing you're building. Are you playing, you know, are you playing a fast, aggressive weenie deck? Are you playing sort of more of a mid-range deck? Is it more of a combo sort of sequence where the costs are going to be kind of crazy all over the place, and it's not really about having a consistent drop every turn. What do I mean by that? If you're playing a fairly fast, fairly aggressive deck, what you probably want to do is on turn 1, you want to be able to play a 1 mana cost something. On turn 2, you want to be able to play a 2 mana cost something. On turn 3, a 3 mana cost something. On turn 4, okay, maybe a couple of 2s, or a 3 and a 1, or maybe a 4 casting cost. It's entirely possible. But some decks are designed where you really want to be able to drop something every turn. You know, again, that mana curve. Cost 1, cost 2, cost 3, cost 4. And that's ideal. Typically, you can't keep going past that because you don't want to have your deck so full of 5 and 6s and so on that you're guaranteed to have 1, because then you might have too many, so sometimes that falls over. But it's really important to keep an eye on this, as well as the average mana cost of your deck over here, and sort of, you know, keep that in mind when you're talking about land and how much you're going to have. And actually, speaking of land, we have only 19 land in here, which is definitely going to be a little light. Probably with this deck, I would aim for 22 land. Again, 22 and 26 is sort of a sweet spot with the way that Magic the Gathering Arena's deck drawing system works. Oh, I still have mountains? Oh, the Sacred Foundry counts as a mountain and a plain, as opposed to Temple of Triumph, which doesn't count as those things, but still gives you that. So it still says I have mountains in here, but yeah. No, I don't have any real mountains in here. So I'd probably do something like that. All creatures, I don't have any instants or sorceries. Probably we're going to want some of those. Again, you know, instants, sorceries, maybe enchantments, something like that, that somehow fit into your deck, that, you know, improve something that you've got going on here in some way. And I don't know, I'm sort of making this up on the fly. As an example of a deck, let me go ahead and save this. As an example of how I got to this deck that I've been using in the tournaments, I went in here, I opened up, you know, to make a new deck. I saw Charmed Stray, and I was like, ah, kitties! I love kitties! Then I went and searched for cat, just to see if that was a possible combination. And overall, I was like, no, I don't think there's a cat-themed deck exactly that will work. But I saw Cauldron Familiar. I was like, well, that's kind of neat. When it costs 1 for a 1/1, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain a life. Okay, so it comes into play, it hurts my opponent by 1, heals me a little bit. Sacrifice a food. Return Cauldron Familiar from your graveyard to the battlefield. Okay, so the cat came back the very next day. This cat can keep coming back, and I like that it doesn't come back to your hand, it goes right back into the battlefield, which means it triggers this part again to hurt my opponent and heal me. Okay. I was like, oh, that's kind of nifty. What's this food stuff? What is food? Well, so then I searched for food, and I saw cards that generate food. So Bartered Cow generates food when it dies. Giant Skewer is an equipment you put on a creature, and whenever it deals damage, it creates food. And when you mouse over one of these things that creates food, you can see what it is. Okay, so food is a token. It's an artifact token, so it's not a card that's in your deck. And it's got the food keyword. And it has an ability that is pay 2 mana and tap this and sacrifice this artifact. You gain 3 life. That activated ability on food, I was like, well, that's not terribly impressive to me. I mean, so if you got this token, you have to spend 2 mana, you gain 3 life. I guess that's, I mean, it's okay, it's a thing, but it's not terribly impressive. But the whole thing with food is you build this, it's not an engine exactly, but you get these mechanics where mostly you're going to be wanting to sacrifice food. You're not going to want to use it for its own activated ability. You're going to want to use it to do something else. For example, we could create food with, okay, let's say Bartered Cow creates food, and then we could use that to bring our Cauldron Familiar back to life. So we don't care about food for what it is and what it does. We just care that there's this token of type food that we can then use for other effects, like Cauldron Familiar, or there's the Tempting Witch over here that lets you you pay 2 and sacrifice a food to deal 3 damage to an opponent, instead of sacrificing the artifact to heal ourselves. And the Tempting Witch comes into play with food in the first place. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sort of getting a vibe. Baked in the pie, pay 4, destroy a creature, and create a food token as a bonus. Like, all right, okay, that's kind of neat. So I sort of started putting together a food kind of centric deck. You can do multicolor if you've got some food quite easily, because the Gilded Goose over here, it's a green creature, costs 1, is a 0/2 with flying, because sure, why not? When it comes into play, it creates food. You can also tap 2 mana to create food, but I think its real power is the fact that you can tap this and sacrifice a food to add 1 mana of any color. Gilded Goose enables multicolored decks because it can be tapped to generate mana of any color. Reminds me of the old Birds of Paradise, which was an amazing card. It was a 1 casting cost, 0/1 flying green creature that would just tap for 1 mana of any color. Bird of Paradise is more potent and useful than Gilded Goose, because you don't need to sacrifice food to make the mana, but the Gilded Goose is effectively filling the same role, which is kind of nice. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat, okay. And so they were sort of making a deck with like lots of things that used food and generated food. And then I think at some point, one of the big things that happened for me is I saw this Wicked Wolf. Oh, this guy is amazing. A 3/3 for 4 by itself is not great value. But when it comes into play, it fights a target creature. So a fight effect means, and it says it right there, basically this creature and the target creature each deal their attack damage to one another. So Wicked Wolf is going to do 3 damage to a creature, and that creature is going to deal blah damage back to Wicked Wolf. And you get to cast this, so you get to choose the target and the timing for it and everything like that. So Wicked Wolf isn't just about having a 3/3 creature, it tends to be removal. It tends to come into play and kill something instantly with the fight effect. And in fact, its second ability, to sacrifice a food, really synergizes well with that, because you sacrifice a food, put a +1/+1 counter on Wicked Wolf, which means all of a sudden it's a 4/4 creature, which means it can kill something with 4 toughness instead of just 3, and it becomes indestructible until the end of the turn, which means you can use Wicked Wolf on a creature that has 100 attack power, and Wicked Wolf won't die. You can also use Wicked Wolf against a creature that's got Death Touch, because Wicked Wolf won't die. You can also use that sacrifice of food ability in response to someone trying to destroy your creature, right? Hitting it with a damage spell, or hitting it with a spell that says destroy target creature. If you become indestructible, and you can do it in response to someone using these effects, then all of a sudden Wicked Wolf doesn't die. I'm like, oh, that's really quite nice. Savvy Hunter is kind of nice too. A 3/3 for 3 is pretty good value, and whenever it attacks or blocks, it generates a food token. Okay, all right, more food coming in. I like that. And you can use as a second ability, sacrifice 2 food to draw a card. We may not always have enough food for that, but an ability to draw a card on demand is really helpful. There's Trail of Crumbs, and then I saw this Oko guy. Again, I wasn't reading the spoilers of cards before this or anything like that. So I see this Oko guy, I'm like, this seems pretty good. 3 casting costs Planeswalker, has an ability to create a food token, has an ability to target an artifact or creature, and cause it to become a generic 3/3. So it loses all of its abilities. It's got no flavor text left anymore, but it's just a generic 3/3 creature. This is a really powerful ability, because you can use it on your own dudes to make 3/3s. For example, Oko can turn any creature or artifact. So Oko can turn a food token into a 3/3 elk that all of a sudden can attack. So you can generate some powerful dudes. Or let's say you use a Gilded Goose early on to get some mana, but then after a bit you don't really need a 0/2 that generates mana, because you'll probably have drawn more land. Well, turn the Gilded Goose into a 3/3 elk. Oh! Not only that, but you can use that ability on your opponent's creatures. Did your opponent just put down 100 creature? Boom. It's a 3/3 elk now. Or, perhaps more importantly, did your opponent just put down a creature that's got a really annoying ability? Boom. It no longer has that ability, because it becomes a 3/3 elk with no abilities whatsoever. So you can sort of neutralize opposition. And then it does have the ability to do an exchange of a target artifact or creature you control. If the target creature opponent controls a 3 power or less. I have used that. I have used that. It is tough because it is like -5 loyalty tokens. But I'm like, okay, all right, hold on. We've got a thing going on here. There's some interesting stuff. And what's funny is this search that started with me being like, oh, cats, and then looking up cats. I ended up with a deck that doesn't actually even use a cat, not a single cat. Instead, it became this wolf-focused deck. If I go to decks over here and look at Big Bad Wolf number 3, I got this. So what I did is I like found those cards. I sort of put a few in the deck, and then I started Googling like, okay, other people, you know, there's a bajillion Magic the Gathering players out there on the interwebs. I'm not the only person who's ever had this idea. So then I started looking for other decks that used some of those cards that I talked about, and like, what cards are they using? Maybe I want to add those in or not. And I've gone through a bunch of different iterations. I've been using this Big Bad Wolf over here to play. It's a little, the draws can be inconsistent. You know, if you just draw a bunch of expensive stuff, you're sort of screwed. You may have to mulligan to get another try. Your ideal draw is a starting hand that's got a Gilded Goose in it, and an Oko, Thief of Crowns. Or Savvy Hunter is also fine. Oko would be better, but that's okay. Because what it means, turn 1, you go, say, Forest Goose. Turn 2, some other land. You can tap the Goose for either a blue or a black, and tap both lands, and there you go. You've got 3 mana, so you can either play your Savvy Hunter or your Oko right away. Both of which are pretty potent. Having this 3/3 early on is really nice. Having Oko, being able to start creating 3/3 creatures really early on is also just gorgeous and wonderful. But yeah, there's a bunch of night interactions. So those Wicked Wolves, I really like that ability. So I've got Night Pack Hunt Ambushers in here, which is just from the core set. It's a 4/4 wolf, and it gives other wolves +1/+1. It's got Flash, which means you can play it anytime you can play an instant, which means you could just hold in your hand, wait for someone to attack, and be like, ha! Wolf! Block you, kill a creature, excellent. The +1/+1 means your Wicked Wolf is even bigger, which means its fighting ability is even better. Then I've got a Tolsimir in here, who creates a wolf token, a 3/3 wolf, and when wolves come into play, all wolves basically get this fighting ability, and whenever a wolf comes into play, I gain life, which is kind of nice. Garruk, Cursed Huntsman, has an ability to generate 2/2/2 wolves at will. All of a sudden, so it's like, oh, I've got this like big wolf theme deck going on all of a sudden, which is kind of nifty. I'm very seriously considering adding a 3rd Tolsimir and Garruk in this deck, and we'll see about that. I had a couple Paradise Druids just to give us slightly more options for mana generation, because we have a lot of cards that cost 4 and above in here. So the extra mana generation, and specifically the mana generation of any color, is pretty useful. I'm still doing a lot of tweaking in here, but it's kind of nifty. Threw in 1 Assassin's Trophy in here as sort of an emergency. There might be something bad I really desperately need to kill in here. It's nice to have a little bit of direct removal. You know, kills any permanent, so we can use it to get rid of a horrible planeswalker or an enchantment or a artifact, which otherwise I have no way to get rid of in here. Well, that's not true, because I could use Oko to quasi blow up someone's artifact, just turn into a 3/3 creature. So that might be it, but nothing with artifacts and whatnot. And yeah, anyway, on an opening draw where I've got Gilded Goose and my Savvy Hunter or Oko, I've got a big win rate. But if I don't have that, it's a little rougher. But anyway, that just goes to show sort of the sort of direction of construction. Anyway, I'm doing fairly well with it. But next thing I'm going to do is probably try to do this milling or cats, or maybe the aggro deck over here. So Plague of Cats, let's talk about this, because I still wanted to use Cauldron Familiar in here. So Plague of Cats has got 4 of those. It also includes some Witch Ovens. So Witch Ovens lets you sacrifice a creature and generate a food token. So what I can do with this is I can use Witch Oven to sacrifice the cat, which gives me a food token, which I can use to bring the cat back into play. Which is kind of nifty as a little thing. So you can always just keep that little slight engine going on. And then in addition to that, it's got a fair amount of denial. So it's got Burglar Rats to cause people to discard a card. It's got the Fenlurker, so each opponent has to exile a card from their hand, basically the same as discard. It's got Davriel over here, which is more discarding of stuff. Plague Crafter, when it comes into play, each player has to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. So this helps me blow up stuff my opponent may have already played, and me sacrificing something isn't quite as painful, because maybe I'm sacrificing the Cauldron Familiar, which I'll be able to bring back, or the Burglar Rat, or we've got maybe one copy, I'm wondering maybe 2 of this Dread Horde Invasion, which can create some zombies for us, which I can keep feeding into various effects. Cavalier of Night. You come into play, sacrifice another creature. If you do, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Again, I could just sacrifice one of my little weenies over here that may or may not have a way to come back in exchange for destroying something big and scary. Love Masker Girl. Oh my god. Someone dropped this bad boy on me in a match. That's the other thing. When I play a game and someone's playing a deck I haven't really seen before, I keep a notepad open next to me and I write down all the cards I see. And then I'm like, you know, oh, maybe I could build a deck around these ideas. Yeah, she comes into play. All other creatures get -1 until -1/-1 until end of turn. If a creature dies, creatures get another -1/-1. So what happens? Masker Girl comes in, gives -1/-1, kills all your, like, say, your 1 toughness creatures, yours or your opponent's. But that triggers Masker Girl again for more minuses, which will kill more creatures, which will trigger more minuses, which will kill more creatures. Masker Girl, unless, you know, you play it at exactly the wrong time, tends to just kill absolutely everything on the board through, like, this chain reaction, which feels really good, but leaves her because she doesn't get affected by it. And there's Liliana over here, creates some zombies, causes people to sacrifice creatures, but importantly enough, has a passive ability. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. So like, oh yeah, so sort of self-sacrifice and mechanics. 23 Swamp is not ideal here, probably 22. It's a fairly cheap deck. If we look here, it's actually got a ton of 1-drops right over here. It's a fairly cheap deck. I think I'd actually go with 22 Swamp and then add in, I don't know, probably just a random card, because there's 4 Cauldrons, 4 Knights, 4 Witches, 4 Burglar Rats. Maybe a second Dread Horde Invasion could be a thing. It's 4. I don't know about a third Davriel, because they are legendary. You can only have 1 in play at any given time. Masker Girl's kind of expensive. I think, like, part of me could just be like, let's add in some more Duresses over here. One of the other decks I've got kicking around, let me just put that in there, is, oh no, I got rid of it. Oh no, Removal Denial. And I think it was partially copied from something else online. The idea of, so it still had the Cauldron Familiars to just deal generic damage, but it had a lot of denial with Duress, not a Yara. Oh, maybe this is not the deck I'm thinking of. So I was thinking just massive amounts of, like, forced discard. Yeah, this isn't really it. Just to keep someone's, like, hand down to, like, get them down to, like, 0 hand size right away. Yeah, this is not the deck. There is a legendary. Yeah, I must have trashed that deck I was thinking of. There's a legendary, I think is a legendary that exists, that at the start of someone's upkeep, if they have less than block cards in their hand, they take 2 damage. And the idea was, like, just keep their hands stripped down to nothing and have them take that passive damage and whatever. And just, if someone doesn't have any cards, you can sort of just beat them up a million different ways. So, yeah, I don't have that deck kicking around. The milling time, this is probably going to need some changes as well, too. But the idea with this one is a deck that wins by having someone have no cards in their hand. Where's the... Is it Drowned Secrets? Yeah, okay, so this is an enchantment. Whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So you get some Drowned Secrets into play, and just cast a bunch of blue spells, whether that's creatures or actual spells. And the Merfolk Secret Keeper you can use twice, right? Once for the adventure, and then once for the card itself. So, and the adventure causes people to lose more cards. Having your opponent have... no, that's a bad example. Yeah, Drown in Lock. Having your opponent have a bunch of stuff in their discard pile causes Drown and Lock to become amazing, but mostly you can just maybe kill them from something. So I might do something like this. I don't know. I'm not sure what deck I want to craft next. Oh, this one doesn't have quite enough wild cards. I think it's got a lot of rares in here. That's not one of them. But yeah, well, we definitely need Drowned in Secret, so I don't have enough wild cards for that. I think I do for all the others. Like, I don't know which one it's going to be. It might be the Plague of Cats, just thematically, yeah. I think I've got enough wild cards. I'm just trying to decide which one I want to do. There's something to be said about just, like, the brainlessness of just a pure aggression deck. Oops, I did not mean to remove you. I meant to try to hit this. Oh, I don't have enough for you either. This, I've been getting my ass kicked. My bum kicked a little bit by this deck here. because it's mostly like this cavalcade of calamity and things themed around it. So whenever one of your creatures attacks, it deals 1 damage to that player or the planeswalker that creature is attacking. So you have a bunch of 1-power creatures that then attack. So the Spitter, which has the same effect again. So the Spitter attacks, it actually, and you've got Calamity in here, it's effectively doing 3 damage. 1 for itself, 1 for its ability, and 1 for Calamity's ability. You've got the Tin Street Dodger, which would also activate that. The Arcanist, which has 1 attack power as well, and lets you cast more spells from your graveyard, which is kind of neat. The Steamkin over here starts off as a 1/1. It rapidly sort of stops being a 1/1, so it doesn't necessarily trigger Cavalcade, but it's okay because it just becomes stronger, so you don't really need Cavalcade the same way. You've got Chandra over here, who summons 1/1 red elementals with haste. So you just use her ability, boom, a couple more dudes come into play, they attack, they trigger a Calamity, and it's just about unbridled raw aggression. That is very satisfying. Dwarven Mines over here create 1/1 reds. And this, I think, was mostly done... I was getting beat up by this, and I was just writing down what cards people were playing against me. I don't think I've actually Googled this deck. So, because I'm sure I can find various iterations of this online. And so, whether 4 copies of each one of these is, what people have found to be optimal or not, or if there's a card in here that, you may only have 1 or 2 copies of, and I haven't really noticed it because people haven't drawn it or played against me. Like, I don't know what the sweet spot of this deck design is. This is just basically what the cards I'm seeing that people have played against me. And it's like, okay, I would like to play this. Just unbridled raw aggression is kind of nice, especially compared to the Big Bad Wolf deck I was playing there. Because it's a little slower to get started, and it requires a little bit more thinking, especially in terms of managing your food tokens and what are you using Oko for. Whereas this is like, just mostly attack, attack, attack. Sometimes you have to think about, am I attacking the opponent or am I attacking the planeswalker you put into play? But still, it's going to be attack, 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 which I think that's going to be pretty enjoyable. There's a bunch of different types of direct damage cards as well. There's another one I think I took out, but it might be a possibility it does 3 damage, and I'm not sure what to do. And we got Skewer. I don't know if that's the right one. I don't know if Light Up the Slit Stage is necessarily, how much or if any we put in here. Yeah, so maybe. Is that all of them? Oh, that's the one we just looked at over here. Yeah, so I don't know what I'm gonna end up making for my next deck. I'm not sure. Probably next thing I'm gonna do is actually go and play, I think I'm going to do the sealed deck tournament, which is going to give me a bunch more cards, which might help me fill out my collection a little bit more, some of the things I might be missing. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, here we are. Oh, just over an hour for this video. But we covered a lot of things. I mean, in a sense, this could have been a 5-minute tutorial on how to use the deck building user interface, but I think it was worth having a discussion about what kind of thought might you want to put in to your deck construction. How do you come up with ideas? And, online research is valuable. Don't be like, well, I'm going to be a purist that, I only invent my own decks, period. It's a good idea, start by, try to think of, what might I like to do, and then see what other people have done, and pick and choose from different ideas, because what'll happen is you'll go and you'll look up someone's deck, and you'll be like, oh, I didn't think about adding that card in here. That's interesting. Actually, I know that, what's her name? I should maybe have Vraska in here. She's quite popular. I think people pay maybe 1 copy of her in here. I guess the idea might be, can you get to use her -9 ability as a different win condition? I don't know. I'm actually gonna have to see someone play with her and what do you use it for to really understand the correct way to use this. It's nice that she can destroy things, but yeah, to power her up, you've got to sacrifice your own things. That being said, I can sacrifice food, right? Vraska here can just eat food to gain +2 loyalty, which gains me a life and draws a card. And if I do that 3 times, then I can use her -9 ability. So I kind of have to have her in play for 4 turns, right? While not taking damage. So 3 turns to boost her loyalty, and then a 4th turn to use it to get the insta-win condition, but it might be required in certain situations. I don't know if that's what people use her for. Again, I'm sort of going to have to watch. I am still tempted to add in a 3rd Tolsimir and or 3rd Garruk as well, because I think that's quite nice. I like splashing the Assassin's Trophy. It's come into play, definitely. I don't think I might go to 2, but I don't think I'd go more than that. Because there's not that many things that I necessarily want to destroy like this. And in particular, casting this early, because it gives your opponent a basic land, casting this early can really affect their tempo. So I don't know how many of those I want in there. I don't know if I need the Paradise Druids. I don't know if I need 4 Once Upon a Times. Although it's really nice. With 4, it increases the chance that you'll get 1 in your opening hand. And you get to play it for free if it's the first spell you've cast all game. Which is really handy. It helps to eliminate issues where you don't have the land you need. Because it's a 4-color deck. Now, this 4-color deck does have a lot of ways to get extra colors, right? Overrun Tomb is green and black. Temple Garden is green and white. Fabled Passage lets me search for basic land of a particular type. Mostly it's a green deck. It's just got a splash of white. It's got 2 copies of Tolsimir. That's the only white. It's got a splash of blue with Oko, literally the only blue that we have. And it's got 2 cards that use black, the Savvy Hunter and the Cursed Huntsman. So there's actually 6 cards in total that use black, including Savvy Hunter that I want to get down fairly early. Although Oko is also a fairly early play. So I do want to... Oh, I guess there's Assassin Trophy now too. So I do want to be able to get a blue and black source fairly rapidly. And it is interesting. I didn't realize this. I'm not actually playing any dual lands that give me blue. That being said, I have Gilded Goose and Paradise Druids to give me other mana, so it doesn't tend to be a problem to get the Oko, because I'm going to get something. Either one of those 6 cards up here, or I'll either draw an island, or I'll be able to Fabled Passage for it. But there might still be some tweaking. That's probably forever going to be tweaking. Especially as the meta changes, right? Depending on what decks I'm facing that are more popular when I'm just queuing up. It might become important for me to speed the deck up sometimes. It might be important for me to slow the deck down sometimes, depending on what I'm seeing a lot of. If I keep... For a while there, I was running into quite a lot of the blue milling decks. Actually, I think that was mostly in this play any deck mode over here. Ooh. Oh, no, I've already done this, yeah. This mode, which is maybe by the time you see this video, is going to be sort of gone, maybe-ish. This lets you play any deck, even if you don't own the cards for this deck. Right now, this is a practice mode going on right now, so you could do that, but there's going to be, I think, a real sort of like mini tournament event for it. Again, you can play any deck. You don't have to use the card. Yeah, even with cards not in your collection. And I think the prize is for, X number of wins is going to be get certain number of cards or potentially win every card, which is like, wait, what? That's insanely cool. So yeah, I think in there I was running into a lot of the milling. But now, I think the biggest thing that's causing me issues is that red aggro deck, because this can be a little slow to start off with. And so, okay, how do I compensate? How do I defend against this pure aggression, especially that gets bonus damage, including against Planeswalkers, so they can blow up my Oko fairly quickly? So I may have to go looking for something that I can add in. I'm not going to be sideboarding, so it's going to be part of my main deck, but that might be slightly better oriented at taking care of that. Maybe it means running fewer of these expensive Planeswalkers and just having slightly more cheap stuff so that I can just, kill the creatures early on or something. Could be. They've got a lot of 1/1s. Maybe I can find something that does, 1 damage to an enemy really easily and just use that to pop their 1/1s. Could be. We'll see. Folks, thanks for watching. I'm going to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.